Hey guys, Enigmatic Mr. L here to talk about bosses in Fire Emblem series, as particularly the ones I find the most annoying and frustrating. So a few rules. First off, this is not necessarily the most difficult boss in each respective games. There are a few bosses I could have chosen which I honestly think are more difficult, but they're not as frustrating. Though obviously this is, extremely subjective. I'm attempting to separate the bosses from the maps themselves, but in some instances it becomes difficult. Where do you draw the line? Like, is this technically part of the boss, or is this just part of the map? So it's just an attempt is made. I'm not talking about DLC and final bosses, so you won't find Anna from Apotheosis and Fire Emblem Awakening, or the final boss in Fire Emblem Conquest. These can be frustrating to be sure, but I'm willing to be a bit more lenient if the final confrontation or like a paid DLC challenges is particularly difficult. Route split, paralog, otherwise optional boss fight, they're all fair game. However, there has to be some sort of incentive to take on the boss if it's optional. So, for example, I'm a Garen in Birthright. I want to say it's like chapter 12, the Opera House. You won't find that here because, yes, he is extremely tough. You're not supposed to be, quote unquote, able to defeat him at this point, but there's no real reward or incentive for doing so. And lastly, as I alluded to at the beginning, this is all extremely subjective. You might find some of these bosses enjoyable to fight. You might find some that I didn't pick extremely frustrating. That's kind of due to the tier list, though, or not tier list, the ranking. It is subjective, so with that out of the way, let's just get on with the list. Starting with Shadow Dragon, the Blade of Light. This one might have been the toughest one for me, in part because the first three Fire Emblem games, in part Evan remakes, I'm not too familiar with them. In the end, I decided to go on Camus. He has a Gradavis, which is basically just a javelin with much more hit, and it's stronger. Generally well-rounded stat, especially that 7 space speed stat. I think that means it can't be doubled in this game. I could be wrong. Now, in like Shadow Dragon, the DS remake, Camus is optional. Lawrence guards the gate, and you can just ignore Camus, but not in the original Shadow Dragon, the Blade of Light. You do have to fight Camus to advance the chapter. With his pretty well-rounded stats and decent weapon, he is a challenging boss fight to be sure. So for Fire Emblem Gaiden, I went with Rudolph, who boasts some incredible stats, and including his Angel Ring, buffs his luck up to the max, a max 40, and allows passive healing every turn. Very difficult to fight, just difficult to land your attacks with his high luck stat. Plus, Gaiden already has terrible hit rates to begin with, and a lot of the fight is indoors, which had like minus 20 hits on all like floor tiles. It's just difficult to hit. Even if you do get him down, he just recovers his HP like rapidly. The only real saving grace that makes this boss fight somewhat manageable is he will not fight Alm. Even if Alm initiates combat, Alm will attack, maybe deal damage to Rudolph if the attack lands, and they'll say something like, why isn't Rudolph counterattacking? In the remake, Echo Shadows of Valentia, it does buff his stats somewhat, particularly skill and, I want to say, res, while also giving a slight boost to strength, speed, and defense, but he has a little bit less luck because the Angel Ring only adds plus 20 instead of plus 40. And with other things like weapon forges, support bonuses, combat arts, he is more manageable here, or he's more manageable in the remake, but in the original Gaiden, Rudolph is a pain to take down. So for Mystery of the Emblem, I went with someone named Lumil, or some translations like Rumil. And you might be thinking, who is this random guy? And I don't blame you at all. You look at his stats, and it's like, okay, he's got like good defense, especially because he's a Chapter 2 boss. He has equipped with a Rider's Bane, and a lot of your starting playable units are Cavaliers. The big kicker on here is that he's one of the very few Fire Emblem bosses who will actively leave his gate. So if you're not counting on that, especially because you're like pursuing that like thief through the forest, try to get the Lady Blade, he will chase after them and likely end one of your units. The remake actually in normal mode, he is stationary, but here's just something I suspect will catch a lot of players off guard, myself included. For Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, I knew I definitely had to go with a boss that has the Pavise skill. Honestly, in terms of like difficult boss fights, I think Ishtar is much more difficult. You face her like on 3 separate occasions, and she's not just like on a throne. You can just move unit in, dance, like just take her down, but she's actively like on the field hunting you down. But just in terms of what I find annoying, I knew it had to be a boss that had Pavise, so I went with Arvis. So he's level 30, so he has a 30% chance to just say no to any of your attacks because he has Pavise. His defenses are maxed out, 30 defense, 30 resistance, with plus 10 on top of both of those due to his Valflame, the holy weapon. Again, there's also have to deal with the Pavise on top of that. And he has good stats elsewhere too. Max HP of 80, high speed of 30, 30 magic plus 10 with the holy weapon, which is very strong on its own. Annoying skills like Nihil, so you can't rely on crits. And they also skill Pavise. Did I mention that he has Pavise? Because I really hate Pavise. Next up, I have Thracia 776. I went with Gomez, who is the boss of the Gaiden chapter, Chapter 8X, a Fog of War map. So, I know I said I'd try to separate the bosses from the maps themselves, but I think it's worth pointing out, like especially on like a first playthrough, if you're playing it blind or semi-blind, you might just move one of your units into Gomez's range without realizing it. And if you don't have anyone to like rescue them out, that'll be the end of that unit, most likely. So he has 18 strength in a game where the cap for all non-HP stats is 20. On top of that, he has good stats elsewhere, 12 defense, plus an effective 10 more defense on top of that, thanks to being on like a throne. A 5% chance, like a Vigor Star, so if his first attack doesn't kill you, the second attack will. 14 speed with 19 constitution, so he doesn't get weighed down by steel weapons. I think it's just an ultimate joke, really, that the best unit to take him down, Aspel, he always gets weighed down by tomes in this game. Even if he uses the lightest tome, he'll effectively have a speed of 17, one short of being able to double Gomez. The one saving grace of this fight is the fact that because he's on a throne, he doesn't move. You can just attack at 2 range, rescue, drop them out, then repeat the process till Gomez eventually falls. But it's still frustrating. Some people might expect me to pick Reinhardt from this game, who has incredible stats, has 2 brave weapons, and a sword and magic, a bunch of skills on top of that, including Vantage, plus Adept and a Cause, Pavise, just a chance to say no to one of your attacks. But I am convinced that everyone who has played Thracia 776 has warp skipped that chapter, since Reinhardt isn't even like the main boss of that chapter, and no amount of stories to the contrary or forged video evidence or quote-unquote evidence will convince me otherwise. For Binding Blade, I went with Kel, or I think some translations call him Gel, who is a boss you fight in the Sakai route of the game. The only Swordmaster as a boss in this game, and for good reason. So depending on how he rolls on speed with like hard mode bonuses work, if he gets 27 speed, he cannot be doubled, period. Because you need 4 more speed to double, and the speed cap is 30. Even just ignoring the fact that he can't be doubled, that high speed, combined with like a decent luck, just gives him a huge amount of a void, plus the like 30 natural void of being like on a throne. And on top of that, Swordmasters have an innate plus 30 crit in this game. So if you attack him at one range, he just has a 30% chance to crit. And most likely he'll be doubling most of your units. Like even some of the best units in the game, like a trained up Lady or a Percival, they'll be having hit rates in like the 40s against this guy, even with weapon triangle advantage. Rutger doesn't do much better. The one thing that kind of makes this boss fight manageable is the fact that, yes, the Lightbrand can attack at range, but it does a fixed 10 damage, and it cannot crit. So you can use bows and magic, but even then you're still going to have to deal with, like, very shaky hit rates. So for Blazing Blade, I went with Kashuna, who is an optional boss battle in the Paralog, I want to say it's like 19X, or the chapter varies a little bit depending on whether it's Eliwood or Hector mode. But you look at this and you're thinking, well, he has no weapons, no strength, and he has no resistance. So it's like, how bad can he be? Well, he's a magic seal, so his low resistance or non-existent resistance doesn't matter, as no magic users within like 10 squares of him can use magic. High HP 50, incredibly dodgy with that speed of like 24. And the real kicker is that you have to defeat him in one turn or he'll vanish. He'll warp into the map at some point, and if you leave him alone for a few turns, he'll warp away. But once you initiate combat with him, if you don't finish him off on that turn, he'll just warp away. and you need to defeat him to unlock a Gaiden chapter within a Gaiden chapter in Hector mode. That chapter is just like a fog of war map. It's not that great, but it has a lot of important lore. I barely managed to defeat him on like normal mode. I'll probably never do it again. I can't imagine how, but it's more difficult to me in Hector hard mode with slightly more stats and just reduced EXP gain. But very just like difficult, annoying boss fight to clear. So for Sacred Stones, I went with Vulture. Now, in some ways, you could view Vulture as the opposite of this list, like a very anticlimactic boss, because the game starts out with him just like beating the crap out of Seth, and you see how dominant Seth is in that game. And compared to that reputation, yeah, he's not nearly as strong as that would suggest, but he's still an incredibly annoying boss fight to me, in my opinion. So he's in the Wyvern Knight class line. Big kicker here is that he has the Pierce skill, so he has a chance to just like negate half the defense of whoever he's attacking. And the battle forecast won't show that. So I remember my first playthrough of Sacred Stones, I sent in Dusel with the Hoplon guard, so he couldn't get crit by the Killer Lance. And I didn't know that Pierce was a thing, and I lost Dusel and I lost the Hoplon guard. And Chapter 15 is a very like long and tedious map. I didn't bother resetting, so he's annoying there. Even just beyond that, he starts with a Philae shield, which, depending on how he rolls in like stats in Erica hard mode or just in like Ephra mode, Brenak is like just a point or two short in speed to be able to steal it. And even just ignoring that, he has the spear to clip by default, very good 1-2 range weapon, so you can't just safely chip away at him at first. If you go into one range, you can switch to a Killer Lance, and if he activates a crit and he activates his skill Pierce, that unit is dead. Also, just solid stats all around. High speed, decent strength. Really just an annoying boss fight. For Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, I went with the Black Knight. So the Black Knight, when you have the final confrontation, it's been building up to the whole game. Like the Black Knight killed Ike's father. It's a big part of his motivation to become stronger. He ends up like, Black Knight just shows up in like chapter 11, just out of a house. Like, oh, he's a major presence. Ike has like a failed confrontation with him, and like the chapter would get like best, the boss fight is really built up, and in the end, it just ends up becoming like a glorified slot machine. Especially if you end up going with Ether Ike, then it just becomes okay. Did Ike activate Ether enough times? You win. Did the Black Knight activate Luna enough times? You lose. Also annoying, if you do want to defeat the Black Knight, if he defeats you, you have to start the entire map over again. There's like a section of the map where like leading up to this boss fight, and you have to go through it all again if you lose. You don't have to fight him. You can just retreat if your Ike is like under leveled, you're playing 0% growth or something like that. That's such an anticlimactic way to end the rivalry that's been building up. On top of that, you only have 5 turns to defeat him. So even if your Ike has like cap strength, cap speed, cap defense, but if you get unlucky, you just won't win in time. A more optimal strategy I found is to go with Wrath Nihil Ike. You get Resolve in like the same map. You fight the Black Knight, so you can't equip it right away. But even then, you kind of need to get lucky with like crits from having low HP. There's also just on top of everything, this is the one map like Miss is like force deployed, and if you haven't been leveling her, she's not going to be of much use because the Black Knight won't fight her, but then some other just like generic enemies come and they will fight Miss. So you have to either like sacrifice her or have a retreat, and then Ike will either have to use his player face healing instead of attacking the Black Knight. So Black Knight, really cool, awesome theme, all that, but this was just a very anticlimactic way to end everything. Or at least end things in Path of Radiance before it got picked up again in Radiant Dawn. Speaking of Radiant Dawn, my pick for most annoying boss fight in this game is Izuka. So Izuka, main thing makes him annoying is he constantly warps around the map. Other boss fights like the bishops, the like senators, once you get to like the tower, they can rewarp. But generally, I find that map they don't do that nearly as much. Once you've taken out most of the enemies, it's not that difficult. But on top of just rewarping around, Izuka's constantly summoning more like crazed Lagoos, just summoning more enemies, rewarping around makes him annoying. Plus, once you finally catch up with him, most likely with Tabarn, who can just easily just tear him a new one, there is a small but real chance that Izuka can just activate Flare or Crit, killing Tabar and just ending that attempt. You have to reset, do it all over. So warping around, summoning, and a small like luck percent chance of like things going wrong earns him a spot on this list. So for Shadow Dragon, my pick's a little bit different. This is the only pick I have here that doesn't rely on any sort of personal experience, because I went with Gomer, the boss of Chapter 2. Shadow Dragon is one of the very few games that I haven't played on the highest difficulty yet, along with New Mystery of the Emblem and Awakening. But everything else I've done the highest difficulty, except maybe if you count Maniac Mode and Path of Radiance. But if you're playing on the highest difficulty here, this is the Chapter 2 boss, so you don't have much time to gain EXP. All of your units will face shaky hit rates against him, and he basically doubles most of your units, and he like two-shots almost all of your units. And he has like ranged weapon, and it's very telling that the most like effective strategy of defeating him involves just like gradually breaking his hand axe through repeated use. Hyman, the boss of Chapter 3, is also very annoying on the highest difficulty, but there's a save point near the boss. You get a killing edge. You can just save, then have Ogma attack with a killing edge, and then if you get the critical, then he's almost dead. You can finish him off with Barst or something. Gomer, and particularly the highest difficulty of Shadow Dragon, is one of the main reasons why I haven't attempted this game yet on the highest difficulty. So for New Mystery of the Emblem, I just went with Irimaya. I don't know if I'm saying that right. She's in a Fog of War chapter, and she has a Siege Tome. That's all I got. So for Fire Emblem Awakening, I went with Ruger, and you might be thinking, who is this guy? He just has like a generic portrait that's shared with like 2 or 3 other boss fights in Awakening. Like, you look at his stats, he doesn't have any particular like impressive stats. He doesn't have any sort of like annoying skills, and you're right. Fire Emblem Awakening, I've only played this on hard. I haven't done Lunatic. None of the bosses seemed particularly noteworthy for me. In the end, I kind of had to think outside the box a little bit, and this is another one of those cases where it's tricky to separate the boss from the map itself, but this guy will go around. He's the boss of a Cynthia's Paralog, and he'll talk to ally or neutral NPC units, claiming to be Crom, trying to recruit them. So he's constantly recruiting new enemies to his side that you have to defeat. And it's a route map, so just, if nothing else, it makes it tedious. He's also just annoying. Not so much like fighting himself, like again, stats, skills, nothing too impressive, but just going around making more trouble for you, lying about Crom's identity. This was my best choice, I think, which I didn't really have much to choose from. So splitting the Fates games into 3. For Birthright, I went with Camilla. Again, kind of like my pick for Awakening. You look at her stats, it's like a Brave Axe. Okay, she's has Bow Breaker, so her usual weakness to bows isn't nearly as common, but her default weapon only has like 1 range. And this is Birthright, a game you just easily solo with Ryoma or Korin. So what's the big problem? It's not really her stats or abilities, but all throughout this map, she will constantly use Dragon Veins to hurl fireballs at your army, which deal like 10 damage to all of them. And it just makes it really annoying trying to like manage all their HP. This is the point in the game where if you're not just soloing with Ryoma with a Korin backpack or soloing with Korin, this is one of the few maps I think it's honestly easier to just use your player phase to chuck a vulnerary, get it from Korin's convoy, and just gradually make your way up to Camilla to defeat her. Using just your full deployment slot, most likely one of them is going to end up dying, which I think earns Camilla a spot on this list. So for Conquest, I went with Iago, who is the boss of like Chapter 26, like the penultimate chapter, kind of like Camille before. It's not so much his stats per se. He does have a strong tome, and he does have some like skills. Like I thought he had Vengeance. I guess not. But the main thing about Iago is that he has that skill, Staff Savant, which boosts the range of all the staffs to 10 range, and it doesn't deplete their uses. So Enfeeble, Freeze, Silence, Hexing Rod, and they'll just cycle going back among them. It's not that bad if it hits one of your like support utility units, like Rallyman gets enfeebled. Like, okay, you weren't really planning on using him in combat anyway. Just he has a massive range over like a lot of the map at the beginning. Most likely you're going right, and like near the end as well. He's a constantly annoying presence. Earns him a spot on this list. For Fire Emblem Fates Revelation, I went with Makoto, a boss who actively lies to you. And if you catch on to that first, like I did, like you take the red door at first, you're going to take all your units get damaged. But then, even if you like believe her like at first and then at the end, don't listen to her and always go through the blue door every time. If you're going for like the sneak route, you're most likely not going to be deploying many units, just like Corin and like one other unit. And so that makes you basically have to rely on just that single pair up to defeat Makoto, which can be a little bit tricky. Like I remember one of the first times in like Hard or Lunatic, Makoto defeated Corin. I had to like try again. I did rearrangement of some like skills or something. Maybe chose like someone else, and I managed to do it. But it's still like a fairly tricky, fairly annoying boss fight. So as I alluded to earlier, Rudolph, he's much more manageable in Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia, which means I had to go with another pick. So I went with Jeddah. He's a boss you face twice, and both times he is technically optional. You fight him in Celica's route, and after a few turns, he'll just leave. Then he's in the final map where you can just fight Duma directly and ignore him. But there is an incentive to defeat him. For one, it makes the map shorter, and it's Celica's route. But he'll also drop that Draco shield if you manage to defeat him. But good luck getting that, as he's only vulnerable to attack every fourth attack. All the other attacks he'll just nullify. And combine that with the fact of that Draco shield's granting him like a huge boon to his defense and res, makes him tricky to take down. And then the final confrontation, he doesn't have the Draco shield, but he has an item that, in addition to, again, granting like passive recovery, it always allows him to counterattack no matter what range he's at. So extremely annoying items both times you have him. An annoying gimmick where he's only vulnerable to attack every fourth turn earns him a spot on this list. So for Fire Emblem 3 Houses, I went with Indek the Immovable, who is a boss of a paralogue chapter, the Leone and Linhart paralogue. So monsters in this game, like multiple health bars, are already annoying. Indek takes it up a step. He has a whopping like 4 health bars, and he takes up 3x3 tiles, so like completely breaking his armor is difficult. He has some like insane skills, like, especially on higher difficulties, including miracles. He just has a chance to just like say no to death. On top of that, just other annoying skills in general, like counterattack. He'll always, fight back regardless of range. Pavice, Aegis can activate. Quick repose, like in his final health bar. Very difficult to take down. Plus, he's in a Fog of War map. And especially if you're playing on a Crimson Flower, just Edelgard and Hubert aren't available. Like Hubert's, he's okay. He's fine enough unit. You're probably going to be using it if you're going like Crimson Flower, but Edelgard is most likely going to be your best combat unit. And the fact that your like main lord isn't available, that's a real downer for a extremely difficult fight. Lastly, in Fire Emblem Engage, I went with Gris, particularly his version in Chapter 20. He's in a Fog of War map, and he's constantly warping around using Celica's like Warp Ragnarok to appear out of the blue, deal massive damage to like your army, and then just vanish again. If you use like a torch, if you find him and manage to take down his first health bar, he'll retreat, and then he won't constantly warp Ragnarok. But that's still annoying to deal with. And there's also just the fact that he has like a skill which is like an inverse of like Celica's effective damage against like terrors, like remnants, that sort of thing. The Corrupted, that's what it's called in this game. It'll just do like recoil damage to basically all of your army, which if you're not careful, unless you take down like Gris health bar, your units can like end up dying to that recoil. Main reason on here is just that warping around the Fog of War map. Not the most difficult boss, to be sure. Like he's still a sage with fairly lackluster defense, that sort of thing, but he is annoying. And those are my picks. As always, thank you so much for watching. Any bosses you think I listed, you don't find them nearly as annoying, why? Or any bosses I left out, you find them particularly frustrating, please feel free to let me know. This is Enigmatic Mr. L, signing out.